The city was alive with the kind of energy that only a bright, sunny afternoon could bring. The pavement was warm, and the sounds of traffic mixed with the chatter of people walking by. It was a good day, a special day, but for Martha, walking down this particular street felt like walking toward a cliff edge. She held her son's arm tightly, not just for support, but out of a nervous habit she couldn't shake. David felt his mother's grip tighten and gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. He knew she was uncomfortable. He could see it in the way she kept looking down at her own shoes, checking the scuff marks on the toe, and then smoothing down the front of her skirt. It was her best skirt, a floral print she had saved for church and special occasions, but standing next to the pristine, glass-fronted buildings of this high-end district. It felt painfully out of place. "Are you sure about this, David?" Martha asked, her voice quiet. She stopped walking for a moment, forcing a few rushing pedestrians to swerve around them with annoyed looks. "We could just go get a coffee, or maybe that bakery you like. I don't need to go in there." David stopped and turned to face her. He smiled, trying to hide his own anxiety. He wanted this to be perfect. For months, he had been skipping lunches, picking up extra shifts at the warehouse, and saving every single penny he could. It wasn't just about buying a gift. It was about trying to pay her back for years of sacrifice. He remembered the winters she wore 3 layers of coats just to keep the heating bill down, and how she always ate the smallest portion at dinner so he could have more. "Mom, it's your birthday," David said softly, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He felt a little underdressed in his clean jeans and button-down, but he stood tall. "I want to." "You've had your eye on that scarf in the window for a year now. I saw you looking at it last Christmas. It's time you had something nice. Something you don't have to save up for months." Martha looked toward the store they were approaching. It was a massive boutique, the name written in elegant gold letters across the glass. Inside, everything was white and bright, illuminated by spotlights that made the jewelry and silk clothes glow. It looked less like a shop and more like a museum where only certain people were allowed to breathe the air. "It's just so expensive," she whispered, shaking her head. "And look at the people going in. They belong there. We look like we just got off the bus." "We did just get off the bus," David laughed lightly, "and that's okay. Money spends the same way whether you take a bus or a limo. Come on." He tugged her arm gently, guiding her forward. Martha took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and tried to look like a woman who belonged in a luxury boutique. It was a brave attempt, but David could see the trembling in her hands. As they got closer to the entrance, the noise of the street seemed to fade away, replaced by the hushed, expensive silence that surrounded the building. There were no heavy wooden doors to push open here. Instead, tall, sleek glass panels stood as the guardians of the store. As they stepped onto the black mat in front of the glass, sensors detected their presence. With a smooth, hydraulic hiss, the panels slid apart silently, inviting them into the cool, air-conditioned world inside. The change in atmosphere was instant. The smell of the city, exhaust fumes and hot asphalt, vanished. It was replaced immediately by the scent of lilies and some kind of expensive perfume that smelled faintly of vanilla and wood. It was a smell that demanded respect. The air inside was noticeably cooler, crisp and filtered, feeling different against the skin than the humid air outside. Martha hesitated on the threshold. The floor inside was a gleaming white marble, so polished she could see the reflection of her own hesitant face in it. It looked like ice. She was terrified her shoes would slip, or worse, that she would track in a piece of dirt from the street and ruin the perfection of the floor. "Watch your step," David whispered, sensing her fear. He stepped in first, his sneakers making a squeaking sound against the high-gloss surface that echoed in the quiet space. Martha followed, taking tiny, shuffling steps. She kept her head down, her eyes darting around nervously. The store was huge. Racks of clothing stood spaced perfectly apart like pieces of art. Each garment was lit by its own dedicated light. There weren't piles of clothes or messy shelves here. Everything was sparse, minimal, and terrifyingly orderly. To their left, a mannequin wore a dress that probably cost more than David's car. To their right, glass cases displayed handbags made of leather that looked impossibly soft. Martha felt a wave of dizziness. She was used to bargain bins, discount racks, and stores where you had to dig to find a treasure. This place was the opposite. Here, everything was perfect, and she felt painfully imperfect by comparison. A few other customers were browsing. They were dressed in sharp blazers and designer sunglasses, moving with a confidence that Martha envied. They spoke in low tones, laughing politely at things David couldn't hear. When the shoppers noticed David and Martha, their eyes flicked over them, a quick scanning assessment, and then looked away. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the look people give when they see something that doesn't fit the picture. David felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. He squeezed his mother's hand again. "It's okay," he murmured mostly to himself. "Just act normal." They walked deeper into the store, guided by the memory of the window display Martha had loved. They passed a section of shoes that looked like sculptures, the heels so high Martha wondered how anyone could walk in them without falling over. They passed a counter loaded with expensive creams in tiny jars, jars that were probably worth more than the groceries she bought for a week. Finally, they saw it, the scarf section. It was located near the back of the store, bathed in a soft, pinkish light. The scarves were floating on transparent acrylic stands, arranged by color gradient. Martha stopped in her tracks. Her eyes locked onto a scarf in the center of the display. It was a beautiful shade of sage green, made of what looked like the finest silk, with a delicate pattern of leaves woven into the fabric. It shimmered slightly as the air conditioning vent blew a gentle stream of air over it. This was the one. She had stood in front of this very window 6 months ago, in the dead of winter, and told David that it was the prettiest thing she had ever seen. "It's still there," Martha breathed out, her voice barely a whisper. She took a step closer, mesmerized. "It's even prettier up close." David smiled, watching her face. For a second, the nervousness left her eyes, replaced by a genuine, childlike wonder. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, wanting to touch the fabric to see if it felt as soft as it looked. She just wanted to feel it just for a second, to imagine what it would be like to own something so lovely. "That's the one," David said firmly. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded wad of bills he had withdrawn that morning. It was all there. He could do this. "I'm going to get it for you." Martha started to shake her head, to tell him again that it was too much, that they should go, but the moment was interrupted. From behind a tall display of cashmere sweaters, a figure appeared. It was a sales associate, a woman with a sharp bob haircut and a suit that looked like it had been tailored to fit her perfectly. She held a tablet in her hand and walked toward them with a look that was not welcoming. The woman's eyes scanned Martha's simple skirt, then David's jeans, and finally landed on Martha's hand, which was reaching out toward the silk scarf. The air in the store seemed to drop another 5 degrees. The magic of the moment was about to break. The woman moved with a practiced, gliding speed, cutting off Martha's view before her fingers could even brush the hem of the sage green scarf. She didn't shout or cause a scene. Instead, she simply stepped into the space between Martha and the display, her presence acting like a physical wall. It was a sales associate, a woman with a sharp, angular face and a suit that looked like it cost more than David's truck. She held a tablet in one hand and a stylus in the other, looking down at Martha over the rim of her nose. Her name tag said simply, *Victoria*. "Please don't touch the merchandise," Victoria said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly in the quiet, empty space around them. It was sharp and cold, lacking any warmth. "The fabrics in this collection are extremely delicate. Hand oils can cause irreversible damage." Martha snatched her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. She took a quick step backward, nearly bumping into a display of expensive perfumes behind her. Her face flushed a deep, painful shade of red. I wasn't going to hurt it," Martha stammered, her voice trembling. She clasped her hands together in front of her stomach, squeezing them tight. "I just wanted to see the texture." "It's so beautiful." Victoria didn't smile. She didn't offer a polite customer service nod. She simply stared at Martha's worn cardigan and then at her shoes. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, not quite anger, but a look of distinct annoyance. It was the look a museum guard might give a tourist who got too close to a painting. "We prefer that customers admire the items from a distance unless they are ready to make a purchase," Victoria said, tapping her stylus against the screen of her tablet with a rhythmic, impatient click. "These are collector's pieces, not for casual browsing." David felt a hot spark of anger flare in his chest. He stepped forward, putting himself slightly in front of his mother. He reached into his pocket, his fingers wrapping around the thick fold of bills he had withdrawn from the bank that morning. "We aren't just browsing," David said, his voice firm. He tried to keep his temper in check, but he could feel the heat rising up his neck. "We are here to buy that scarf. It's her birthday." "That's the one she wants." He gestured toward the green silk floating on the stand. Victoria paused. She looked David up and down, taking in his jeans, his sneakers, and his simple button-down shirt. She let out a barely audible sigh, a tiny exhalation of air that was meant to show just how inconvenienced she was. She didn't look impressed by his declaration. She looked skeptical. "That piece is $450, Victoria said, her tone flat. She said the number slowly, as if explaining math to a child who didn't understand the value of money. "It is 100% silk, imported." "I know the price," David said. He pulled his hand out of his pocket just enough to show the corner of the cash. "I have the money." Right here, for a moment, David thought the mention of cash might change her attitude. In his world, money was money. But in here, apparently, there were rules about who was allowed to hold it. Victoria didn't look at the money. She looked past him, her eyes scanning the store to see if any real customers were watching. "We have a strict policy regarding large bills and verification," she said, turning her attention back to her tablet and dismissing him with a flick of her finger. "And honestly, I'm not sure that color is right for her. It requires a certain complexion, a certain lifestyle to maintain." Martha let out a small, hurt sound. It was barely a gasp, but David heard it. He felt it like a punch to the gut. Victoria continued, not looking at them now, speaking to the air or perhaps to her tablet. "We get a lot of people coming in here to take photos or to touch things they can't afford. It wastes our time and risks the inventory. If you aren't serious, there are plenty of souvenir shops down the street that might be more suitable for your budget." The insult hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just that she thought they were poor, it was that she thought they were lesser. She was treating them like they were dirty, like they didn't belong in the same room as the silk and the marble. David opened his mouth to yell. He wanted to tell her that he had worked double shifts for 3 months to get that money. He wanted to tell her that his mother had worked harder than Victoria ever would, scrubbing floors and raising a child on her own. He wanted to throw the money on the counter and demand she apologize. But before he could speak, he felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Martha. She was shaking her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her. The excitement she had felt just moments ago had been completely crushed, replaced by a deep, aching shame. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to be the reason people stared and whispered. "David, please," Martha whispered. Her voice was so weak he could barely hear it. "Let's just go, it's okay." "I don't really need it." "It's not okay, Mom," David said through gritted teeth, glaring at Victoria. "She can't talk to you like that." Victoria ignored them completely, turning her back and walking toward a different display, pretending to straighten items that were already perfectly straight. She had decided they didn't exist anymore. It was a power move, and it worked. It made them feel like ghosts. "Please, David," Martha begged, pulling harder on his arm. "I don't want it anymore. I just want to leave." David looked at his mother's face. He saw the embarrassment etched into every line. He saw the way she was hugging her purse to her chest, trying to make herself invisible. If he stayed and fought, it would only make it worse for her. It would prolong the humiliation. He took a deep breath, forcing the anger back down. It tasted bitter. He looked at the green scarf one last time. It was still beautiful, but now it felt tainted. It was no longer a symbol of love. It was a symbol of this moment, of this woman's sneer. "Okay," David said softly, turning to his mother. "Okay, Mom, we'll go." He put his arm around her shoulders, shielding her as much as he could. He turned her away from the counter, away from the woman, and away from the scarf. As they began to walk toward the exit, Victoria's voice floated out from behind them. "Make sure you use the other exit," she called out, not turning around. "We are mopping the floor near the front." It was a lie. The floor was gleaming and perfectly dry. It was just one last petty thing to say, one last way to remind them that they were in her world, and she had the power to push them around. They walked in silence back through the aisles of expensive clothing. The store seemed to be watching them now. The other customers, the few who were there, glanced up from their phones. David felt their eyes on him, judging him. He felt his ears burning. Martha kept her head down the entire way. She didn't look at the shoes or the bags anymore. She just stared at the marble floor, counting her steps, wanting nothing more than to be outside, back in the noisy, dirty city where people didn't look at you like you were trash. When they finally reached the sleek glass entrance, the sensors beeped and the panels slid open. The rush of warm air hit them along with the sounds of the traffic. It felt real. It felt safe. They stepped out onto the sidewalk, leaving the cold, silent world of the boutique behind. Martha let out a long, shaky breath once they were on the street. She wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "that was a silly idea anyway. Let's go get that coffee. I think I'd like a coffee." David looked at her. He felt helpless and furious. He wanted to fix this, but he didn't know how. He nodded, trying to smile back. "Yeah, Mom," he said. "Coffee sounds good." They stood there for a moment, gathering themselves, the humiliation still clinging to their clothes like the scent of that expensive perfume. David looked back at the store window. The mannequin with the green scarf was still there, looking elegant and untouchable. He was about to turn away and lead his mother to the corner cafe when he noticed a man walking toward the store entrance. He was alone, dressed in a simple jacket and a worn baseball cap. He didn't look like he belonged in that store any more than David did. David watched him, curious to see how the staff would treat him. The city noise felt louder after the silence of the boutique. Cars honked in the distance, a siren wailed a few blocks away, and the chatter of pedestrians rushed back into their ears like a wave. Martha stood on the sidewalk, blinking rapidly in the natural light. She took her glasses off and rubbed them on the hem of her skirt, trying to buy herself a few seconds to compose her face. David stood beside her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his fingers still clenched around the roll of bills. He felt useless. He had worked so hard for that moment, planning it out in his head for weeks. He had imagined the smile on her face, the way she would unwrap the scarf, the pride he would feel. Instead, the memory of that woman's voice, cold and dismissive, was echoing in his mind. "I'm fine, David," Martha said, putting her glasses back on. She forced a bright, brittle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Really, it's just a piece of cloth. I have plenty of scarves at home. I don't need another one." "It wasn't about the scarf, Mom," David said, his voice tight. "It was about how she talked to you. Like you were nothing. People like that, they build walls around themselves," Martha said softly, patting his arm. "Don't let it ruin your day. We are alive, we are healthy, and we have each other. That's more important than a fancy label." David nodded, but he couldn't let go of the anger. He looked back at the store. Through the thick, spotless glass, the world inside looked calm and perfect. He could see Victoria, the sales associate, standing near the counter. She was checking her reflection in a small mirror, completely unbothered, as if humiliating two people was just a normal part of her daily routine. "Come on," David said, turning away. "Let's get that coffee. There's a place on the next corner." They started walking away, but David moved slowly. He couldn't help glancing over his shoulder. He felt like there was some unfinished business, some justice that hadn't been served. It was a silly feeling, but it stuck in his chest like a stone. Just then, a figure approached the store from the opposite direction. David stopped, watching the man out of habit. He didn't look like the usual customers for this street. The man was dressed in a well-worn black leather jacket, a simple white t-shirt underneath, and scuffed boots. He had a small daypack slung over one shoulder. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, shielding his face from the sun. He didn't walk with the aggressive stride of a businessman or the confident strut of the wealthy. He walked with his head down, hands in his pockets, moving with a quiet, relaxed energy. He looked like a guy who might be on his way to a mechanic's shop or a dive bar. David watched, curious. He wanted to see if the queen of the boutique, as he now thought of Victoria, would treat this man the same way she had treated his mother. The man reached the glass entrance. The sensors beeped, and the sleek panels slid open for him. As the man stepped inside, the atmosphere in the store seemed to shift instantly. David stood still on the sidewalk, pretending to look at a parking meter, but his eyes were locked on the scene unfolding through the glass. Inside, Victoria looked up. Her initial expression was one of mild irritation, the same look she had given Martha. She likely saw the leather jacket and the cap and assumed another wanderer had come in to waste her time. She opened her mouth, probably to deliver a rehearsed line about browsing only for serious buyers. But then, the man removed his cap. He ran a hand through his dark, messy hair and looked up at the sales associate. Victoria froze. Her mouth snapped shut. The tablet in her hand wobbled slightly. It was Keanu Reeves. David recognized him immediately. It wasn't just because he was famous. It was because he had a distinct face, a kind of rough-hewn kindness that was hard to mistake. But right now, he didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a tired guy who just wanted a moment of peace. The transformation in Victoria was instantaneous and painful to watch. The cold, icy arrogance melted away, replaced by a wide, desperate smile. Her posture changed from rigid and defensive to leaning forward, eager to please. She practically floated around the counter. "Mr. Reeves," she exclaimed, her voice suddenly an octave higher and dripping with honey. "Welcome, it is such an honor to have you here. We are huge fans." David felt a fresh wave of disgust roll through his stomach. He watched as Victoria gestured grandly around the empty store, as if she had personally arranged the lighting just for him. She was ignoring the expensive clothes she was supposed to be protecting. She was ignoring the no-touching rules. Keanu gave her a polite, small smile. He didn't seem to enjoy the fuss. He looked around the store, his eyes scanning the racks. He looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Just looking for something simple," Keanu said. His voice was low, barely audible through the glass. "A gift, maybe?" Of course," Victoria gushed. She was circling him now like a shark that had smelled blood, but in a friendly way. "We have a wonderful selection of new arrivals, or perhaps something from our private collection. We can close the store if you want privacy." David shook his head in disbelief. Close the store? She had chased his mother out like a criminal, threatening to call security or insinuating they were thieves. But now she was offering to shut down the whole business for this man, just because he was famous. He looked at his mother, who was a few feet away, looking at a menu board outside the coffee shop. She hadn't noticed. She was trying hard to forget the last 10 minutes ever happened. David looked back into the boutique. Keanu was wandering toward the back of the store, the same section where he and Martha had been standing. Victoria was following him like a puppy, chattering away about Italian silk and French designers. Keanu nodded politely, but he wasn't looking at the clothes. He was looking around. Suddenly, Keanu stopped. He was standing right in front of the scarf display. He looked at the empty space where the green scarf had been Martha's scarf. Then his gaze shifted. He looked toward the glass doors. He looked through the reflective surface and out onto the street. David held his breath. He felt like the actor was looking right at him, but then he realized Keanu was looking at something else. He was looking at Martha. He saw the older woman standing by the coffee shop, smoothing her skirt with that nervous, defeated gesture she had done inside. He saw the way she carried herself, slightly hunched, as if she was trying to take up less space in the world. Keanu's face changed. The polite smile faded. He tilted his head to the side, his eyes narrowing slightly. He looked from Martha back to Victoria, who was still blabbering about thread counts. It was a subtle look, but David saw it. It was a look of realization. Keanu Reeves wasn't stupid. He could feel the energy in the room. He could see the contrast between how the staff was treating him and how they must have treated the woman outside. Victoria reached out, trying to hand him a cashmere sweater. "This would look wonderful on you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu ignored the sweater. He ignored Victoria. He took a step closer to the glass, pressing his hand against the frame. He wasn't looking at his reflection. He was looking at Martha. David saw the actor say something to Victoria. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw Victoria's face drop. The fake smile faltered. She looked confused, then shook her head. Keanu said it again, more firmly this time. He pointed toward the door. David's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He didn't know what was happening, but for the first time in an hour he felt a spark of hope. He took a step toward the store, watching as Keanu Reeves, the movie star, turned his back on the expensive clothes and the fawning sales associate, and started walking toward the exit. He was coming out. The sleek glass panels slid open again, and Keanu Reeves stepped out of the boutique. He didn't walk with the hurried pace of someone escaping. nor did he walk with the arrogance of a celebrity. He moved with a steady, calm purpose, leaving the cold, air-conditioned silence of the store for the chaotic warmth of the sidewalk. Inside, David could see Victoria standing frozen near the scarf display. Her mouth was open slightly, her hand hovering in the air as she tried to process what was happening. She wasn't used to people walking away from her, especially not people she was trying to impress. She took a step toward the door, but then stopped, seemingly unsure if she was allowed to chase after him. She watched through the glass, her face a mixture of confusion and panic, like a manager who had just realized she had made a terrible mistake but didn't know how to fix it. David felt his heart hammering against his ribs as the actor got closer. He looked at his mother. Martha was still studying the coffee shop menu, her back turned to the street. She was trying to compose herself, taking deep breaths to calm her shaking hands. She had no idea that the man who had been inside was walking toward them. David wanted to say something to warn her, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. He just stood there, his feet rooted to the concrete pavement. Keanu reached them and stopped. He didn't walk right up into Martha's face. He kept a respectful distance, giving them space. He took his hands out of his pockets and looked first at David, then at Martha's back. He waited for a moment, a small, polite smile on his face. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was deep and gravelly, but incredibly gentle. It carried over the noise of the street without being loud. Martha turned around slowly. She was expecting to be told to move, or maybe that she had dropped something. When she saw the man in the leather jacket standing there, she blinked in confusion. She didn't recognize him immediately. To her, he just looked like a kind stranger. "I'm sorry," Martha said automatically, clutching her purse. "Are we in your way?" "No, not at all," Keanu said. He shook his head slightly. "I was inside, in the store. I couldn't help but notice you looking at that green scarf." Martha's face fell. The humiliation she had been trying to suppress came rushing back. She looked down at her shoes. "Oh, I was just looking. I didn't mean to touch anything." "You had good taste," Keanu said firmly. He took a small step closer, his eyes sincere. "That green is a difficult color to wear. It takes the right person to make it look good. I think it would have looked beautiful on you." Martha looked up, startled. She searched his face for sarcasm, for a hint that he was making fun of her, but she found none. His expression was open and earnest. "Thank you," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. David finally found his voice. We were going to buy it, but the staff said it wasn't for us." Keanu turned his attention to David. The actor's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He glanced back at the boutique, where Victoria was still peering through the glass like a ghost. He looked back at David and gave him a nod of understanding. "Some people focus too much on the price tag and not enough on the person," Keanu said. He shrugged his shoulders, a casual, human gesture that made him feel less like a movie star and more like a regular guy sharing a frustration. "That's their problem, not yours." It just felt unfair, David said, feeling a strange sense of relief talking to this stranger. "She worked hard all her life. She just wanted one nice thing." Keanu looked at Martha again, really looked at her. He saw the lines of exhaustion on her face, the worn cuffs of her cardigan, and the quiet dignity in her posture despite everything that had happened. He seemed to understand the story without needing any more details. "Well," Keanu said, rocking back on his heels, "I can't fix people's behavior. But I hate the thought of you walking away from something you love because someone made you feel small." He reached into his pocket. For a second, David thought he was going to give them money, and he felt a flash of embarrassment. But Keanu pulled out a simple black leather wallet. He opened it and took out a card, but it wasn't cash. He looked at the store, then back at Martha. "Do you mind if I do something?" Keanu asked. It wasn't a demand, it was a request. He was asking for her permission to help. Martha looked at David, bewildered. David nodded slowly. I don't mind," Martha said. "Good," Keanu said. He turned toward the glass doors. Victoria was still watching. As soon as Keanu made eye contact with her, she straightened up, smoothing her jacket, preparing to come out and grovel. Keanu didn't wait for the doors to open all the way. He stepped back into the boutique. David and Martha watched from the sidewalk. Through the glass, the scene was silent, like a television show on mute. Victoria rushed over, her smile back, desperate and oily. She was talking a mile a minute, probably apologizing or trying to blame someone else. Keanu held up a hand and she stopped instantly. He pointed toward the back of the store, toward the scarves. He didn't look at the other clothes. He walked straight to the sage green scarf Martha had been admiring. He lifted it off the stand with a gentle touch, the same touch Martha had wanted to use. He held it up against the light, checking the color, then nodded. He folded it carefully, not rushing, treating the fabric with the respect it deserved. He carried it to the counter. Victoria was typing furiously on her tablet, looking terrified and elated at the same time. She probably thought she was about to make a massive commission. Keanu placed the scarf on the counter. He took out his credit card and handed it to her. While she processed it, he didn't look at his phone or look around boredly. He looked out the glass doors. He looked directly at Martha and David standing on the sidewalk. He gave them a small thumbs up. David felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that a stranger, a man who had no reason to care, had seen their hurt and decided to fix it. He had walked back into the place that had treated them like dirt, just to make sure they left with their heads held high. Inside, Victoria bagged the item in an expensive-looking box with a ribbon. She handed the bag to Keanu with a bow. He took it, but he didn't say thank you. He didn't even smile at her. He just turned around, the gift bag in his hand, and walked back toward the light. The sensors beeped. The glass doors slid open. Keanu Reeves stepped back out onto the street, the afternoon sun catching the leather of his jacket. He walked over to Martha and held out the bag. "Happy birthday," he said softly. Martha stared at the bag, then up at him. The tears that had been threatening to spill finally rolled down her cheeks. "You didn't have to do that," she choked out. "I know," Keanu said. He reached out and gently patted David on the shoulder. "You take care of her, okay? She's got great style." "I will," David promised, his voice cracking. Keanu gave them one last, genuine smile. "Enjoy the coffee, guys." He put his hands back in his pockets and turned away. He didn't wait for applause or thanks. He just walked down the street, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians, becoming just another person in the city. David looked at his mother. She was holding the bag like it was made of gold, but for the first time that day, she wasn't looking at the ground. She was standing tall, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, a real smile finally breaking through the sadness. "Should we go back in?" David asked, gesturing toward the boutique. "Maybe say thank you to the man?" Kishan looked at the store. Victoria was watching them from behind the glass, her face pale, looking like she wanted to sink into the marble floor. Martha took a deep breath. She shook her head. "No," she said, her voice strong again. "We have what we came for. Let's go get that coffee." David nodded. He put his arm around his mother's shoulders, and together they turned their backs on the boutique, leaving the coldness behind them. Walking into the warmth of the day, the small coffee shop around the corner was everything the boutique was not. It was cramped, warm, and smelled strongly of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. The floor was covered in chipped tile, and the tables were scratched, but the air inside felt real and welcoming. The noise level was high, machines hissing, music playing from a small speaker in the corner, and people talking loudly about their days. David led Martha to a small wooden table near the window. He pulled out the chair for her, and she sat down, clutching the expensive boutique bag tightly in her lap. She didn't let go of it for a second. It was as if she was afraid that if she loosened her grip, the kindness of the last 10 minutes might turn out to be a dream. David went to the counter and ordered 2 coffees and a slice of chocolate cake, a treat they rarely indulged in. When he came back to the table, balancing the cups and the plate, Martha hadn't moved. She was just staring at the bag, a soft, confused smile playing on her lips. "Here we go," David said, setting the coffee down in front of her. "Hot and strong, just like you like it." "Thank you, David," she said. She finally looked up at him, and David saw that the sadness had evaporated from her eyes. In its place was a spark of light, a glimmer of joy that he hadn't seen in a long time. "That man, do you know who he was?" "I think so," David said, sitting down across from her. He took a sip of his coffee. "I think he was Keanu Reeves, the actor." Martha nodded slowly. "I thought his face looked familiar. I've seen him in movies on the television at your aunt's house." But he looked so different in person. He looked tired but kind. "He didn't have to do that," David said, shaking his head. "He didn't have to come out here and talk to us." And he certainly didn't have to go back in there and buy that after how that woman treated us. He saw something, David, Martha said softly. She ran her hand over the textured paper of the bag. He saw that I was hurt. Some people, they look right through you. They see clothes and money and status. But he looked at me and he saw a person. That is a rare gift. Martha carefully pulled the box out of the bag. She untied the silk ribbon with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of white tissue paper, was the sage green scarf. It looked even more beautiful outside the harsh spotlight of the store. In the natural light coming through the coffee shop window, the color was deep and rich, like the leaves in the park in spring. She lifted it gently, letting the fabric slide through her fingers. It felt like water, cool and impossibly smooth. "Put it on," David urged her. "I want to see it on you." Martha stood up. She unfolded the scarf and draped it around her neck. She arranged it loosely over her shoulders, tucking the ends in. The green color brought out the warmth in her cheeks and made her eyes shine. It looked elegant and expensive, but it also looked like her asterisk. She sat back down and turned toward the window, catching her reflection in the glass. For a moment, she didn't look like a woman who spent her days worrying about bills and cleaning houses. She looked like a lady who belonged in a magazine. She smiled at her reflection, and David saw her stand a little taller in her seat. "It fits perfectly," she whispered. "It looks amazing, Mom," David said, and he meant it. "You look like a movie star." Martha laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that made a few people at the next table turn and smile. "Oh, stop it, but I do feel lovely." "I really do." They sat there for a long time, sipping their coffee and sharing the cake. They didn't talk about the rude sales associate anymore. They didn't talk about the embarrassment or the anger. Instead, they talked about the scarf. Martha talked about how she would wear it to church on Sunday and how she would save it for special occasions. She talked about how she would take care of it so it would last forever. As they talked, David watched his mother. He realized that the day hadn't gone the way he planned. He had wanted to be the hero. He had wanted to march into that store, slam his money down, and buy her happiness himself. He had felt like a failure when they walked out empty-handed. But now, seeing the glow on her face, he realized something important. Sometimes you can't fix everything on your own. Sometimes the world is mean and people are cruel, and no matter how hard you work or how much you love someone, you can't protect them from every sharp word. But sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes a stranger steps in and reminds you that goodness still exists. David hadn't bought the scarf, but he had brought her to the place where she could receive it. He had tried his best to give her a good day, and the universe had stepped in to finish the job for him. "You did good, David," Martha said suddenly, as if she could hear his thoughts. She reached across the small table and covered his hand with hers. Her hand was warm and soft. "You wanted to make me happy, and I am happy. That is what matters." David smiled back at her. "I'm glad, Mom. You deserve it. You deserve a lot more than a scarf, but we'll start with this." They finished their coffee and gathered their things. Martha carefully placed the box back into the bag and held it securely. When they stood up to leave, David noticed that other customers in the shop were glancing at them. But this time, he didn't feel judged. He didn't feel like they were looking down on his clothes or his mother's simple skirt. He saw a man at the next table nod at them, a look of respect in his eyes. Maybe he had seen what happened outside. Maybe he just liked the scarf. It didn't matter. They walked out of the coffee shop and back onto the busy street. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. The air was cooling down, signaling the end of the afternoon. As they walked toward the bus stop, they passed the luxury boutique again. The lights inside were turning on, making the store glow even brighter against the darkening sky. David glanced in the window as they walked by. Victoria was standing near the door, tidying up a display of gloves. She looked up and saw them passing. For a split second, her eyes met David's. She didn't look arrogant this time. She didn't look superior. She looked uncomfortable. She quickly looked away, pretending to be very busy with a pair of leather gloves. David didn't stop. He didn't glare, and he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He was walking next to his mother, who was wearing a smile that could light up the city. She was wearing a scarf worth hundreds of dollars, gifted to her by one of the most famous men in the world. But she wore it with more grace than any of the mannequins in the window. They reached the bus stop just as the big green bus was pulling up. The doors hissed open. "Ready to go home?" David asked. "Ready," Martha said, clutching her precious bag. She stepped up onto the bus with a lightness in her step that hadn't been there that morning. David paid their fare and followed her to a seat near the back. As the bus lurched forward and merged back into the flow of traffic, Martha leaned her head against his shoulder. She closed her eyes, her hand resting on the bag in her lap. David looked out the window at the city passing by. It was the same city it had been that morning, noisy, crowded, and sometimes indifferent, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt full of possibilities. He looked down at the top of his mother's head, the gray hairs catching the light from the street lamps. "Happy birthday, Mom," he whispered. Martha squeezed his hand. "It turned out to be a wonderful birthday, David." A wonderful birthday indeed. And as the bus carried them home, away from the luxury stores and toward their quiet neighborhood, David knew that this was a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. Not a story about humiliation, but a story about how, for one brief moment, the world was kind.